So essentially, what I want to kind of chat about with movement variations, and why I don't think that variations are something that should be really considered regressions, because that word has a bit of a negative connotation to it. Whenever people are thinking about movement variations, it's usually when they're talking about they've tried to attempt a certain movement. So let's call it movement A, and they failed. They couldn't do it, right? So they're feeling a little bit down on themselves. Um, so they ask for a variation, right? Can I do a variation? But then usually when that happens, they feel like they've failed, and now they are taking a step back. So they're doing a regressed movement, right? So there's ways that you can look at either progressions or regressions, and I'll touch on those two terms a little bit later. But for the most part, what I usually hear in the fitness world, at least, when we're talking about regressions, that often has a coupling with variations in movements. So, um, taking the movements that we kind of did today as an example, so when we were starting with our standing positions, it's not really a regressed movement of our final beast unloaded position. It's just a different movement in general, right? So instead of looking at it as a regressed form of it, it's a completely different base position, right? You're doing a wave unload, but you're doing it in a standing wall mounted position, right? So it's not a regressed form. What's the intent of the movement, right? So the intention of that movement as you're against the wall is not to do the beast position on the ground, right? That's not the goal to move up to work towards that. The intention as I'm doing that against the wall is to work on your spinal awareness, right? Seeing how well you can actually control your spine while in that position, right? So that's the whole intent behind me administering a movement like that. Same thing when I do the second position on the chair. It's not a progression from the first one, and it's not a regression from the last one. It's just a movement that's done on a chair where you specifically focus on moving your spine through a wave while you're in a push-up plank position on a chair. So that's literally all of that movement's intention is. And then that kind of drifts us into the final movement, which is our full, more conventional beast position, our loaded beast position, doing the wave unload into the front step. So with that one, it's a little bit more of training to do that movement, right? You don't really need to do that movement otherwise, right? There's no other big real life application to doing the wave unload with the beast, unless you want to practice animal flow, right? So it's not really like that first one or the second one are regressed forms. They're just different movements, but the intention today was to work on spinal segmentation, so it's to work on your spine, while working on shoulder stability, which is why we were constantly planted and fixed on a closed chain loop in the arms, and then also working on a little bit of the calf, the lower leg with the tippy toes, and obviously as you're sitting and exploding, generating power with the legs, you obviously get your lower body work to be done. So that's kind of the main bits and the main meat and potatoes of the talk for today. But in general, with the progression and regression, I want to just like dial back on that. I'm not discounting the notion of progression and regressions. They are still very much a thing, but I'm just simply saying that when we're looking at movements, like individual movements, variations, we can look at them as an individual movement, right? When I look at progressions and regressions, I'll look at how the progress is in a specific movement. So I would take, let's say, that standing movement that we did. I would see how the progress is from session to session that we do that movement. So if you are doing more spinal segmentation while you're standing, cool. If you can produce more force into that wall, nice, we've progressed. If maybe we haven't practiced that much and we can't really remember how to do it, or the strength is lacking while doing that specific movement, then we have regressed. So that's more of how I take a look at progression and regression, not so much the movement variation part. So, yep, that is my little topic of discussion on movement variations. I'll open up the floor now for any questions that might be had on the topic. Otherwise, thank you guys for listening.